right, Congressman Tim Griffin here in the studio today. He's going to be spending an hour here from 2 to 3. By the way, did you happen to hear him a couple of days ago? He made the statement that he was talking about the Supreme Court and the arguments and all of that, and he thought that they would uphold the Obamacare. He must have been listening to different tapes than I listened to. Maybe he had an 18-minute break in it or something. But the bottom line is he said, well, the Republicans have not offered anything on medical reform.
Not true.
And within 30 seconds, I had already sent out a tweet about Coburn's plan.
We have so many bills.
Price's plan, and I gave the bill numbers, and I addressed it to Senator Pryor's office, saying, here's a little. I did a little background checking for you. Check these out.
Yeah,
haven't heard that anymore.
Well, look, and he, I work very well with all of our delegation, but I would just say.
See, I don't have to say that.
Yeah, well, I do work with them well. I disagree with. We have our disagreements, and I can tell you that there are a stack of bills in the House that specifically address health care. And, don't get me started on our budget, our bipartisan Medicare reforms. We reached out, the House did, to Democrat Senator.
That's the one the vote was, 513 to 0. Oh, sorry. That's the president's.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I think it was 414 to 0.
Bill.
But, last time I checked, there hasn't been a budget coming out of the Senate in over 3 years. Mm-hmm. So, look, the bottom line is, I think that for people who are who listened to the arguments last week, I think that it is readily apparent whichever side you're on. I mean, whether you're Jeffrey Toobin for CNN and he's left leaning, or whether you're on the other side, it's pretty clear that there are a lot of skeptics about the law. And what's interesting is the people who have voted against or who argued against the constitutionality of the law, that basically said this is not constitutional. I heard a lot of very, very specific legal arguments. Most of the folks that I've heard on the other side who defend the president's health care law, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, most of the folks defending it, the ones that I've heard, they're not making precise legal arguments based on the Constitution. They're just saying, well, come on, I mean, it's got to be. Or, people need health care. And, this is, how could you question all these types of things? And I'm not addressing the merits of those, whether people do need health care. We do need health care reform. But those aren't constitutional arguments. Just because you want something to be so does not make it constitutional. And I actually got to have a great discussion with Paul Clement, who was the lead advocate for the states suing the federal government. Mm-hmm. Arkansas, as you know, the Attorney General here did not sign on to that.
It didn't have any merit.
Yeah.
Remember, that's what our Attorney General...
It has a whole...
It didn't have any merit.
I don't know precisely what he said, but I'll tell you it had a lot of merit. And I would have requested that our state be at the top, even though Alabama comes before Arkansas. I would have asked that they move us up above that on that filing. But in any event, Paul Clement, I said to him, and I don't want to go too long, but this is really interesting to me, this constitutional stuff. I said to Paul, look, I understand the whole Commerce Clause argument generally, but let's get in the weeds. And he said, well, here's a point you need to remember. If you look at the Constitution, when there are instances where the founders gave the federal government the right to create or raise or establish, and then the right to regulate. For example, to raise an army and then regulate it, mm-hmm. to build a navy and maintain it, but and to coin money and then regulate it. So you've got sort of a creation part and then a regulation part, but not with the Commerce Clause. Commerce Clause did not provide anything about creating or building or raising, only regulate, which meant because they didn't willy-nilly throw language around, they were very precise.
Right.
Which meant we're not giving the Congress the power to create commerce. We're saying if the commerce exists, you can regulate it. But if someone's not dealing in wheat, you can't make them buy wheat
or go out and grow wheat.
Right. You can't. You don't have. So if someone's not buying the insurance, the federal government doesn't have the power to say we're going to make you buy it, then we'll regulate it. And that's interesting. If you look at Article 1, Section 8, where all of these just happen to have it in my pocket. Article 1, Section 8. If you look, you will see all those different powers. And
18 of them, correct?
Yeah. To borrow money. Here we go. To coin money and regulate. To raise and support armies. To provide, basically build, and maintain. But when you get to commerce, it just says to regulate commerce. Mm-hmm. Not establish, not create, not build. And that is where Scalia and Kennedy and Alito and those folks were going with this. Or like, wait a minute.
And I know Thomas was thinking it, but he doesn't.
Yeah,
talk.
he's got a theory on how oral argument's supposed to work. It's different, but the bottom line is that's what they were seizing on. I mean, where's the limits? If there are no limits to the federal government's power, well, then why do we have this document?
Why do you? Yeah, I'll tell you what. You would not have that document if they just go ahead and say they can do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
You might as well throw the rest of the document out. .222, Dave Ellswick Show, KARN. The congressman is in for the hour. I've got a few things I want to talk to him about, then we'll let you talk to him as well. Just know the phone number is 433-0092 or 800, of course, 264-0092 for you to get involved in the show when we open up the phone lines. Congressman, we talked about, SCOTUS and what they're doing. Evidently, they voted on this today. And now they're going to be sitting around writing, the consent and dissent papers on this, and we'll know about them by the end of June. I say 90% chance they strike it down, the mandated clause. I don't know if they'll sever it completely and say that the whole thing falls. Now, that I don't know.
Scalia made just an incredible argument on severability, which I thought goes right to the heart of this. We all, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I'll just say that a lot of folks assume that if you're gonna strike a part of a law down, you just leave the rest. But Scalia made a great point. He said to the Solicitor General, he said, what makes you think that Congress, in their mind, would have backed the rest of the law had it not been packaged with this piece? Basically saying if you're trying to gauge congressional intent and you take away the individual mandate and go back in time to the Congress, most likely the bill would have never passed. And I started thinking about that going, wait a minute. He's basically saying we got no guarantee. And in fact, we can make the argument Congress wouldn't even pass the bill. The Democrats in Congress that voted for it, they wouldn't even have voted for it had it not. In fact, I could make the argument that it never would have even been brought to the floor. If it was just the piecemeal stuff, it would have just, because why they weren't going to bring something to the floor that was just tweaking at the edges. They were going to bring something to the floor that had the individual mandate at the core. So if you take away the individual mandate, I can argue that they might have been spending their time debating on how to block energy exploration or something, not talking about health care.
Well, it was a shell bill. I mean, Nancy Pelosi was right about something. She said that they had to pass the bill to know what was in it, because until they passed the bill, and when they passed the bill, there was really not much in it. They filled it up afterwards.
Well, and a lot of it,
and they're still filling it up because it's the Bilius's job to fill it up.
You're talking about, and that's a whole other debate about Congress basically
Deferring
not doing
to the
their
bureaucrats?
not doing their job. I would rather Congress not rush laws, not rush bills, particularly monumental ones like this, and provide as much detail as possible and provide as few sections that require what's called rulemaking or regulatory activity as possible. Because as soon as you pass the bill, you lose, and then it's signed into law by the president, you lose control. Congress, who authorizes the regs, the regulations in the first place, you lose control over them. You can conduct oversight, but it's out of your hands the way the system's currently set up.
But Tim, this has been going on since the day of
Amen.
Of Nixon, when he started the EPA, and then they started talking about clean air, and congressmen and senators said to the EPA, "Well, yeah, we're going to make this organization, and then you guys tell us."
Yep.
What clean air is.
Hey, they
didn't want to vote on it.
Let me be real clear. It's a Republican problem. It's a Democrat problem. It's an institutional problem, not one party or the other. I don't care how long you've been doing it. It's one of the many things that I say needs to be changed. And I've made clear a lot of the other things: no budget, no pay, end congressional pensions as the beginning of reforming the broader civil servant system. So there are a lot of things we've been doing for a long time. The baseline budgeting that CBO does and that we do. I mean, I don't agree that we ought to just assume increases year to year. We ought to do like normal families do, And I think most families just look at what they spent last year, and they may go down, they may go up. I mean,
well, they look at what they let out go last year.
Sure.
And then they see if they got a little extra coming into this year.
Yeah.
And then they determine if they can still go with the outgo that they did with last year.
Yeah.
At least that's how I kind of do that. So Ed, you've seen this go on for a long, long time. I mean, you were in the Bush administration, and you worked to get the president elected, and things going on. What is the mindset in Congress now, and even before this, that they would pass on what their job is to make law? And just turn it over to faceless bureaucrats to fiat rule.
I think it's incredibly irresponsible. I think the Democratic majority, they jammed this through. They didn't have time to do the details that Tim is right. The Congress has the responsibility to do. And, the truth is, they're fine turning it over to bureaucrats to write these rules. And I do think that's partly what Nancy Pelosi meant when she said we have to pass the bill to find out what's in it.
That's exactly what she meant.
Right. They'll tell us. But, we've got these glorious goals, and they'll fill in the details. It's incredibly irresponsible, and it has resulted in a huge infringement on our individual liberties and freedoms.
Isn't it a way to not have to face the voter?
Well, yeah, because and those folks that are writing it, as well-intentioned and as hardworking as folks may be that are writing these rules, they're not elected. They're not accountable.
Yeah, I know.
They're not accountable, and you can't get them on the phone to just say, "Hey, we don't like the draft that you're floating." But if I could, let me read a quote of James Madison,
okay,
father of the Constitution, and I think this quote is relevant to what we're talking about here. It's relevant to the healthcare law, and it's relevant to the we'll have to pass it to see what's in it. He said, quote, "It will be of little avail to the people, the citizens, that the laws are made by men of their own choice, by their elected representatives, if the laws be so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood." And he said that over 200 years ago.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing what these guys knew what was going to happen.
He knew exactly. And there's another one, another great quote here that it really puts it in perspective, because we think of the federal government as so powerful. But here's what Madison said. He would not recognize what we have today. He said, quote, the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution, proposed at this point, to the federal government are few and defined. The federal government's got a few powers, and here they are. They're defined. And listen to this about the states. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite.
Mm-hmm.
If you would have asked James Madison what he was saying, he would have said, the game is in the states.
Yeah, federalism.
That's where the innovation's going to be. That's where the activity's going to be. That's where people are going to really govern themselves, because the state of Arkansas can come up with their own constitution. They can do their thing and let another state do their thing. That's what he was talking about. And it's incredible how different that is from what we see today.
Yeah, and you know what was fascinating, if you listen to the Supreme Court questions, day 3 was about the Medicaid part of it.
Yeah.
It got the least attention, probably.
The coercion argument.
But the coercion argument, and so the focus on the relationship between the individual and the federal government that's seen in the mandate got a lot of attention. But the justices were all over this relationship between the federal government and the state governments in the Medicaid provisions. That's why I left. I'm like you, Dave. I think they're going to strike the whole thing.
All right. We got to take a break.
Sure.
Let's get over, and we want to get to Jack Heinrichs and get the news.